takes it to the Senate.
Provost Cooper.
Present.
Deputy Provost Richardson.
Present.
Councillor Aitchison. Councillor Alexander.
Present.
Councillor Falkirk. Councillor Billy.
Present.
Councillor Bissett. Councillor Clark. Councillor Blackwood. Councillor Bowes. Councillor Coleman. Councillor Colley. Councillor Coombs. Councillor Flynn. Councillor Garner. Councillor Goldie. Councillor Grant. Councillor Harris. Councillor Hughes. Councillor Kerr. Councillor McHugh. Councillor McCluskey. Councillor Meiklejohn. Councillor Monroe. Councillor Merton. Councillor Nichol. Councillor Nimmo. Councillor Patrick. Councillor Reid. And Councillor Spears.
That takes us to declaration of interest and just for clarity, I'll read this out. Members should declare any financial and non-financial interest they have in any economic business at the meeting, identifying the relevant agenda item and the nature of the interest. Have any declaration of interest at this time? That takes us on to item 3 on the agenda, it's referral from Executive the 10th of December 2019. It's the Treasury Management Interim Review 2019-20 and reported by Mr. Brian Spear, our Chief Finance Officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert, and good morning. As I say, Provost, the paper's been referred on from the recent meeting of Executive. I wasn't proposing to go through the report. The current report indicates that consistent with Treasury Management Code, after consideration by the Executive, it requires to be passed on to the Council for approval, and the recommendation reflects that fact. I'm happy to take any questions or points of clarification that the Council may have.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Meiklejohn.
Thank you. As has been said, this is a referral from the Executive. There were some questions that the discussions previously expressed at the Executive. However, people were content with the direction of travel with the Treasury Management Report. Therefore, I'm happy to move the report.
Okay, we've got a second for that.
Forward second.
Okay. Anybody else want to come in, or is everybody happy with the report? Councillor.
On the first question, we take our responsibility for securing investments very, very seriously. Indeed, we use an acronym slide that we describe the approach we take SLY, which is a hierarchy of reviewing investment options. First element, exit security, which is quite evident, I think. The second element is liquidity, i.e., how quickly we can get the investment back if we have any concerns. And the why, the third one, and the lowest in the priority is yield, i.e., what interest we get from that. So we're not trading off risk, risky investments to get a higher return. Our cash flow ebbs and flows. Some days we perform in the market, and some days we lend. And indeed, the report before you, I unfortunately see it into this, we've got a table, snapshot in time, and at that point we have 48 million out of investments. You can see from that little table the makeup of those investments. In practical terms, we use credit rating agencies to ensure that only the most highly rated sources that we lend to, and also we further restrict risk by limiting the sums we give to any institution, and that limits 8 million million, and also we limit the period we can lend out, and that's a maximum a year. There'll be very seldom when we're doing that. Most of it's overnight or probably 3 months, so that further protects us. So I think you can have confidence that when you're lending money out, it's done with great care. On the second question, I think that would flow perhaps from the recent report considered by the executive on the Accounts Commission review of local government in 1819, and there was a bar chart in that which I extracted and put it in the cover report that was considered by executives, and it just showed the relative borrowing and debt position for councils across Scotland, and that chart showed Falkirk Council as having one of the lowest, it was fifth lowest ratio of debt and borrowing to our revenue, which is a sensible barometer to use. So we have suggested in the back of that are well placed. And indeed, I think it probably has considerable relevance to the matter that Council will consider in the very near future in terms of the budget report and the position of Council tax. I know earlier when we had some initial discussion around the matter, but the hoped for opportunity, we don't know when we'll get settled, but it's still there to raise Council tax beyond 3% of inflation element. As the report that previously considered noted, that would give you the opportunity when you elect to do that to lever up our capital investment by something in the order of 20 million. So linking those to the Accounts Commission report, we give you comfort that we have sufficient headroom to comfortably be able to accommodate that in terms of our debt and borrowing. Hopefully that answers your question.
Councillor Lee?
Thank you, Provost. Just first of all, a comment that the expectation is the bank rate will reach 1% by March 2022. This is a 3-year term. And periods for borrowers are not very good news if they've got money in the bank. So that's another one that's most good for different something like that. The question is about 4.28, that's the borrowing for fifth. An application was made to the PWB, and we have been sent a borrowing limit of 2.678 million. And it's a complex report, it's one of the expanding up the sort of point, and then
yeah, in our borrowing from the TIF, I think as members will be aware from previous reports, the additional non-domestic rates triggered by the initiative are used to cover the borrowing costs that we're well placed there. There are, notwithstanding the much publicised 1% increase in the PWLE rates that somewhat came out of the blue recently, there are adjustments that are made to that rate that we can track, and one of them relates to borrowing for economic development purposes. Clearly, the TIF very much sits within that rate. Maybe the final point to make is that notwithstanding that increase, somewhat mitigated by the adjustment I've just mentioned, borrowing from the public works one day continues to be an exceptionally low rate. We're able to borrow at not much more than the government itself on the market. So very attractive borrowing position.
Okay, thank you. No more questions for the deed. Agree with the recommendation? Agreed, thank you. That takes us to item 4, which is revitalising the Falkirk Town Centre. You received the report on the supplementary agenda. The report is by Lily Harris, the Director of Development Services. Thank you.
This report follows on a decision by members at the council meeting following the The background section of this report highlights the history that this organisation has in terms of supporting town centres, and also having places in town centres on behalf of the community. And there are statistics in that report to show the impact that the deployment in particularly in our main extension, which is Falkirk. There has been significant growth in footfall. However, I suppose one of the interesting points coming out from research done on this is that there is capacity within Falkirk Centre for additional comparison goods retail at the right opening stage. I think that we need to factor that into our considerations moving forward and make sure that we are capturing that opportunity that is forward. So in terms of the work that the partnership's been doing, the Advice Lies of Falkirk partnership was established in March in March of last year, and it was agreed that this would be the vehicle to take forward the work of the particular increasing Falkirk Centre. The membership was agreed by members at the terms of the action plan is also that action plan work and I'll reflect some of the points in that today. The next meeting of that group will take place in March this year, and it is focusing very much on the action plan that so it will be very action focused. As paragraph 1.2 of the report, you will see the projects that members have approved for the funding, the windfall funding that we received from government of £1.976 million for support to centres, with some of that investment in aware that the majority of the funding is going to Falkirk, and the projects that you can see on the approved are highlighted there. There are direct links back from these projects to the action plan, and the action plan is a practical action plan to be able to
also discussed the issue of increased vehicular access to the high street. And this is something that we've touched on a number of times. Work on that has begun, but we do need to recognise that it will be linked very closely to decisions that members will make at some point in the future around the project that is the HQ in the Arts Centre and the site for that particular project, because clearly we will have to tie in, that has the potential to be a very significant development, and therefore we'll have to tie in our long-term arrangements for traffic and pedestrian access to the town centre into that project. So as I say, we're not doing anything, it's just that we'll have to have regard to that, and indeed if there were any other significant developments to come along, we would have to reflect that as well. There's a significant amount of engagement in relation to the town centre through the Revitalising Falkirk Partnership. There's also work ongoing in Bowness and Grangemouth that I've mentioned as well. I think it's important to note, as I've said in the report, that the action plan for the town centre is dynamic. If there are opportunities come along, particularly if there are funding opportunities, the real challenge for us for this town centre is that we don't own very much. We own obviously this site, and we own car parking sites, but other than that we don't have an ownership, significant ownership in the area, which is a constraint for us. So if there are funding opportunities come along, whether they come through transport funding or sustainability funding or green funding, we'll be looking to chase the money, if you like, and we'll be looking to tailor some of our projects to those funding streams. And that work again is coming together, particularly with discussions that we're having with other public sector partners, NHS, police, and not public sector, but also the transport providers as well. I think it's also important to remember the impact that the work that's already been done in the town centre, that the investment that the council has made in the churchyard, you've heard me talk about this before, and also in respect of tourism, and also in respect of the THI, which was a very innovative project, you'll recall at the time. That project has been completed, but I think we are seeing, certainly Pete's here with me today, we're seeing the lasting impact of that project has had, particularly around community engagement and the confidence that the investment that has been made there, led by the council, is giving to private sector investors, and we're seeing investments being made in properties in the high street on the back of that. And I think that the council having some certainty around its HQ Arts Centre project, whatever the decisions may be, I think the certainty also helps with confidence for the particular investors. So the rest of the report deals with the financial and risk implications. There's nothing significant that I would want to mention there. As I say, Pete Reid, my colleague, is with me today, so hopefully between us we'll be able to answer members' questions. Thank you, Provost.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Meikle-John.
Okay, thank you, Provost. I think Rona has covered very much what the Town Centre partnership and particularly the action plan is around. But I think that the fundamental aspect is the partnership. The partnership doesn't just cover the Town Centre action plan. It is much broader in its remit. It has a strategic remit as well as delivering on the actions. But what is absolutely fundamental is the fact that this is not a council-led partnership. We are a key player and a leader within it, but only one of the leaders. And the way that we are working with the private sector, the retailers, it means that we can maximise the investment within the town centre. And as a result, it means that the benefits that will come from that will be far greater than any one organisation on its own. The THI was a fantastic project that was taken forward, and that has created the backbone of the ability to have the engagement that we have, having built up the relationships with key businesses within the area and having seen how that has evolved. Because let's be quite clear, at the very beginning, not everybody was on board with that. Not everybody was keen to have the levels of disruption that it was created within the town centre, but it's one of those things, you can't make an omelette without breaking eggs, and once they actually started to see the benefits of all of what was happening, they are now one of our greatest advocates, and they are demanding to be involved. So I think that we have to take this forward as a true partnership, and the actions that were agreed were those that were agreed collectively. And it will be dynamic as things are delivered and going forward, that it will change. There'll be new things will come on board. Things will evolve as part of the larger master planning of the whole of the town centre project. There's specifics that have been raised around parking. There's a parking review currently ongoing at this moment in time within Falkirk Town Centre. And while some are demanding free car parking, there's others that are saying, no, don't do that, that's not going to work. That actually will cause us difficulties. Therefore, the parking review is quite fundamental to be able to find the optimum that is going to work for everybody and best for our town centre. Similarly, the aspect of opening up the east end of the High Street, that's something that we're all very happy to consider, but it has to be part of the bigger master plan. To do that right now would involve a significant investment in infrastructure, because the paved area is not sustainable to take the levels of traffic that we would be looking at. So it all has to be thought through, and it cannot be seen as a barrier to perhaps one of the bigger projects that we're looking at in our HQ and Arts Centre, but can be looked at in conjunction with all of that. So I think that we have a really good partnership. We have a really strong partnership within the town centre. And as ever, you're never ever going to please absolutely everybody. And from the council's perspective, we're not always going to hear things that we want to hear, but that's okay. That's okay. We need to work through the issues of the town centre and able to actually deliver something that is much better, more accessible, and something that is going to be sustainable for the future. And that means that we do have to have short and long-term goals, and this is what this action plan does. I look forward to seeing the money that we've just allocated to all of our town centres, the 1.9 million, starting to be implemented and starting to see that difference coming forward. And that's, again, the actions on that was decided by the partnership. It wasn't the council that was dictating. We did the work, but that was directed from others, particularly those that are actually at the coalface. There is a further meeting in March, and there will continue to be meetings going forward. And as we see things achieved within the plan, new things will come on, and that's the way it should be. It will not always be delivered by the council, and quite rightly too, because my vision of 5-6 years' time, when we have concluded the bulk of the work, the key areas of the work in the town centre, it should be a town centre group that continues to take that forward, and the council can start to take that step back and just be one of those that actually are at the table and not having to take that drive forward. So I'm content that we've got the town centre report and the action plan. It will continue to be looked at. It's a good start to where we are, and as the bigger pictures evolve, other things will come on board.
Thank you, Provost. I'm surprised that we're not the people in charge of driving the town centre, because in actual fact, this report highlights the fact that 2,200 jobs in 497 units rely on us making a good job of taking town centre projects further forward. Between 2008 and 15, 27% drop in jobs, the highest drop in shop numbers in the whole of Scotland, a loss of 15% of our shops. We are talking here about a real challenging issue, and therefore we have to lead, and in every way we can. These figures were highlighted by councillors at a scrutiny meeting 18 months ago, the same week that Marks and Spencer's announced that it was closing. And ironically, the same week that the THI initiative celebrated its conclusion. Now, we had made the town look better, but we hadn't helped the footfall for traders. And had we been listening during the process of this 3 or 4 year project or whatever it was to what traders were telling us, because it's this listening exercise, it's coming together with the people on the ground who know what's happening that is the key and a crucial part of what it is we need to do. Since then, we have had these new initiatives, but I would like to know specific things that have taken place. We are talking about a utilisation of this windfall on town centres, and Falkirk will receive 1.16 million. But what's been proposed is more conservation regeneration and digging up the high street, well, not the high street, but Newmarket Street and Lint Riggs. Is this what traders want at this time when things are really tough? It's more of the same. Or are we waiting for the HQ Art Centre to resolve the problem? Because we can't, it's 5 years down the road. So shopkeepers want small things to happen, small, quick wins, initiatives that are going to bring footfall into the town centre, events and other initiatives that will make the town centre easier for small businesses to invest in. The report was asking for help for these quick wins, an events programme, revived food festival perhaps. We have fewer cafes than there are in Bowness down the high street, and we need more bars and cafes and meeting places, because whilst we might not have the big shops, people will come and browse and they want to go somewhere for a coffee or meet their friends. The financials says if additional measures are necessary other than this 1.1 million, then there isn't anything unless we find money from other sources. So it's really important that this 1.1 million is spent sensibly, and I question whether this is going to produce the actual quick wins that the town centre needs.
Ms Geisler, you got an opportunity maybe to come back in, maybe address some of the points that Councillor Monroe was querying. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Provost. I agree with a lot of what you're saying. This is a huge challenge. It's not just a huge challenge for the council, it's a huge challenge for all of the stakeholders in the town centre. And I think you'll see from the action plan that as I mentioned, there are a number of public sector partners who need to play their part. There are also a number of private sector partners who need to play their part in all of this. And I think what we've endeavoured to do here is to take the feedback that we had from the workshop, and that was a stakeholder workshop, and crystallise that into an action plan that everyone can agree with. And that's what this plan is. And you'll be able to see the direct links between the application of the funds and the action plan. There's a direct link between those, particularly around signage, particularly around car parking. These are things that are very high up the agenda, as you've highlighted yourself. So to reflect on the comments of the leader, this was a partnership. We spent a lot of time, a lot of energy engaging with partners. We now have to show that the funding that has been spent is directly linked into this action plan, and we can see this. Now, this money required to be committed by March 2020, which we have done. Well, we've not quite committed that, but it's only things, we were only able to spend on things that we could actually commit by that time. So we're actually quite fortunate, A, that we have the money, and B, that we were able to deliver projects that were identified in the revitalising Falkirk plan to that timetable, which is a lot of the drivers for choosing these things. So I think that, and to pick up your point about listening to traders, we have been listening to traders. It's traders who were largely the stakeholders who produced this plan. And I think to reflect again on what the leader's saying, we can't make this what the council thinks that the traders want, which is exactly the point you're making. But this is what the traders are telling us that they're looking to get, and that's why it's been captured in the plan. And it's keeping faith with that partnership and showing that that funding is delivering on the things that they have said that is important. You mentioned events. Now, events are largely organised by, excuse me, the bid company, Falkirk Delivers. And I know that you've had an exchange with our colleague Jackie about this. There are a list of events that are being developed for the coming year that are about to be finalised. And these are things like markets, and they are, I've got a list of them here somewhere. So, for instance, there's a Volunteers Day, Producers Markets, Music Festival, the Arts Festival, which is a highly successful festival this year, Halloween events, fireworks, Christmas events. So these are all organised, but it's the bid company that do that, and they're one of our partners, helpfully. So that will be a list of events that will be considered by the partnership the next time we go, and they're only just being developed now. So I think there is a real joint will amongst the partners to do exactly what you're saying, is to make a difference. But the challenge of the fact that the council doesn't own anything other than the properties I've mentioned in the town centre is a significant one. And the challenges of the private sector being in a position to step up are equally challenging. And the budget constraints that we face, I think it's unfortunate, but we have to recognise that that's the world in which we live. But we do have significant things going for us. I know that the Scottish Towns Partnership, for instance, considers us to be a good example of a town that's almost taken itself by the scruff of the neck and deciding to do something about it in a partnership way. We have the capacity for the comparison shopping that I mentioned. So, and we've got the historic, the heritage assets that we have in the town centre, which bring in visitors, and the tourism aspects that we have already to build on. So I don't think anyone's saying this is going to be easy, but I think we are taking the small steps that we can, and that we're taking these in the right direction because they are directly linked to that partnership plan.
Thank you, Councillor Black.
Thanks, Provost. This report wasn't quite what I was expecting when I spoke on the matter last November. It's a really good action plan, but I hope that, like Councillor Moore, we could have a few quick wins. And I understand that the officers in our economic development team are under pressure with so many challenges. They're very hard working and they have a lot to deal with, and I'll go back to that later. But some towns are bucking the trend, and I think we would all recognise that. We all know towns have been to their we need to find out what they're doing. Most of those towns have a lot of independence like we do, so we need to ask what they're doing differently. Are the rents different in those towns? What we could do to emulate their success? Is there no economic development money available at all that we could use differently? And of course, this is about Falkirk, but in my speech last November, I mentioned Grangerith and Bowness. And I know that we don't have any council rentals in Falkirk, but we have lots in Grangerith and Bowness. What could we do about them? Could we not keep some of the income from them to help support those small businesses more? Because we have what their tenants actually get for the money that they pay. And Falkirk could do the businesses who own the empty shop units, and you've spoke about how the difficulties of working with the private sector. I appreciate that. Could we work with them more, though? I'm thinking about what we could do with some of the smaller units, and I'm always getting around for being operational, but I think I'm always going to be like that, because if you're doing scrutiny and you're doing that kind of thing, you have to actually sometimes things that might be slightly operational. But anyway, for one example is Thornton's shop. If we worked with it's just an example, if we worked with the owners of that shop, and we got the council, we got the college, or we got the youth employment people, apprentices, to go in and kit it out, the owner agreed to do a low rent, and we did that with different other businesses in the town, because there's no point in shops sitting empty. We've empty for years because of the high rent, and I know that we do good deals for folk when they come in at first, but when you see those signs above those shops saying £280, £300 a week for rent, then it puts you off. So could we do something like that, and then get the private owner to agree to a low rent for a year even, and then have a seminar, something like that, invite people that are interested in doing retail but don't know what to do to start it off, because there are people out there, it's their dream to have a shop. So we do have gaps in the market in the town. I know that there probably will be ever larger stores come to Falkirk again, because that is what's happening in Scotland or in the UK, or in the north anyway. And I know that everyone is working hard to make a difference, but in my opinion, our council is at a disadvantage, because our officers, who are very hard working, as I've said before, can't split themselves into 2 or 3. Our towns are probably unique in Scotland in that we are surrounded by so much industry, and with so much of Scotland's economy depending on that industry in and around our towns, for be on the ball, and they're always looking at the bigger picture. And that sometimes they don't have the time or the resources to look at the smaller things. And I think that is, the smaller things are important as well. I don't think we should be putting all our eggs in one basket. I agree with Councillor Munro again, because it is going to be 5 years before the queue is built. So we need to try and do things. And I know that the master plans, the action plan has all these things in it, but I still think we need to look at the small things more. And of course, the Scottish Government and their rates, there's a big argument. And the Scottish Government have, in recent years, been helpful in that smaller units don't pay rates, so that has helped. But we obviously have to look at the bigger businesses and retail, that the Scottish Retail Consortium, everybody is saying that rates are far too high for retail. So, of course, that's an ongoing fight that we have to keep fighting, because we need to have a realistic rateable value for every shop, so that the bigger companies can survive as well, because we don't want to lose any more of them. But at the end of the day, as a council, we've had to make so many cuts to services over the last 10 years, including economic development. And some of those cuts have made me feel sick. And just now we're looking at this year shutting public toilets. Last year we had to do away with the flowers, and the only way we're going to have flowers in our towns is if community groups plant them. These are 2 examples of things that make our town centres look better, make people want to come to them. Just small things. Again, it's about the small things. So our council does need to be funded properly so that we can do these things, and we can't continue to have cuts. The Scottish Government has cut so much from budgets to local authorities, choosing to take 7.4% of a cut to local authorities, whereas the cut from Westminster was 0.7. These are the reality, so we need to do something about that and campaign as well. But anyway, if we had properly funded council, then all our businesses could have the proper support that they need. Thank you, Provost.
Okay, thank you. Before I bring in Councillor Alexander, Councillor Spears, Mrs Geyser, you want to come back in on Councillor Black and any issues that she raised there?
Happy to do that, Provost. Thank you. Again, as with Councillor Munro, there's so much you're saying that I don't disagree with, and obviously everyone would agree with. And it's just about how do we prioritise our resources, which are reducing resources, and the point that you've made about the impact on the economic development team over the years is a well-made point. Pete's marvellous, but there's only one of them, and it's just managing to deal with those priorities that you've mentioned. You talked about little things, and I think that we don't forget about the little things. And the bid company is a great help to us there, because they engage, and the Healthy High Streets group as well that is in Falkirk, they engage, they comprise, the Healthy High Streets comprises traders, and the bid company obviously, there's a number of business representatives on that as well. But the work that they do obviously is to engage very closely on a day-to-day basis, and they're able to identify some of these smaller things, smaller opportunities that you've identified. I will say we're always happy. Any ideas that you want to take? I think, Councillor Miller, you may be on that Revitalising Falkirk board, are you? Group. Anything that you think would be helpful, bring these ideas forward. We'll take them into that group, and we'll do some work on them in advance, and we'll bring them into that group, because I'm sure there are some things that have been mentioned today that would be welcomed as part of that process. So hugely challenging. I think we've got a lot going for us, and we shouldn't talk ourselves down difficultly, but significant challenges associated with the work that we've got to take forward. But another thing is to go back to the point I made about chasing the money. If there are funding streams coming forward, and if you have a look at the government's programme for government, almost every element of programme for government has a green aspect to it, around transport and around climate change. So the funding that will necessarily flow through these initiatives, we need to be able to shape some projects to access that funding, or indeed the town centre funding that the government's already provided. So we need to stand ready with projects that will tap into these external funds and will help to relieve some of the pressures that you've both identified. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Mrs Geiser. Just to say before I bring Councillor Alexander in, that every member here has an opportunity in some forum, if they have particular ideas themselves, to bring them forward. I'm sure that everybody would be delighted for. Councillor Alexander?
Yes, Provost, but before I go on to speak about the subject, can I just offer my condolences to Councillor Nicholl. This was an experience I had last year. It's not pleasant, so I feel your pain. Coming back to the report, anyone who was at the conference last week would have noticed and couldn't deny the positivity that exists within the commercial sector of Falkirk Council, or Falkirk Council area. From the Managing Director of Alexander Dennis, right way through to the voluntary sector, right way through to the small business, it was positivity. It was positivity because what they were seeing coming forward was a cohesive, phased plan to deal with the major issues that exist within Falkirk Town Centre. They're not interested in the quick wins. They want an answer to the fundamental process, the fundamental question of how to increase footfall. The comments that were made to myself, and the comments that were made to officers, and I'll ask Mrs Geiser to perhaps expand on it, or perhaps the Chief Executive, was overwhelmingly relief that we're now talking the bigger picture. We're now talking about the regeneration of Falkirk Town Centre. The issue of the relationship between retail, commercial and domestic is there. The proof is in the other local authorities have gone down this road before, that have seen the footfall increase significantly. Falkirk Council rightly is leading that. But we also share the responsibility with the private sector. We share the responsibility with the small businesses, the large businesses. We share the responsibility with the community organisations. We share that responsibility, and that's why the Town Centre Forum is about to come to fruition. There's a member of the Labour group, there's a member of the Conservative group appointed to that particular forum, and we look forward to their contribution on the days that it meets. But it's not just an organisation that's there for meeting. It's not just an organisation that's there for talking to business. It's an organisation for getting ideas fed back to us. So things are moving, but we need to ensure that we never take our minds, our focus off the big picture, because it's the big picture that will deliver us the type of town centre, the type of heart of our community that we want, that we need, and we will have. But, so I would really urge members to get behind, and to be seen to get behind the regeneration works. Because it's important that we send the right message out to business. It's important we send the right message out to the UK government. It's important we send the right business out to the Scottish government. It's important that we're seen to be unified. We supported the TIF because it was good for Falkirk. We're asking you to support regeneration because it's good for Falkirk. And when I say Falkirk, I mean obviously Falkirk district. The fact is that we have before us a report which is the best that it could be done in the short term without committing significant financial resources to it. Some of the issues that have arisen, such as the pedestrianisation versus opening up the high street, are issues that will require significant investment if the decision was to change what we have at the moment. We don't have that significant investment. The investment that we have has been focused. It's been focused on the big picture. Please, please don't take your eyes off the big picture. In terms of some of the points that have been made already, Councillor Black, what you've suggested with regards to the vacant shops is a good suggestion, but it's been done just now. It's been done just now. Some of the other issues that have arisen in terms of the pedestrianisation, I've already spoke about. The opening up of the east end of the high street has been looked at the moment, but we need to join these programmes together. We need to make sure that all of the programmes join together and that we have continuity in terms of what we have, and in terms of what we want, and in terms of what we will get. There has to be continuity. And I'll leave it at that, Provost, because every person knows that was at that conference last week, the positivity that was there. We need to keep that. We need to hold it in. We need to bottle it if necessary. And we need to use that positivity, that touching of agendas with the private sector. We need that. And but we will, as a public sector organisation, be at the forefront along with our partners. But it is a partnership. It has to be a partnership. And it's something that will benefit us. So please, please, please don't take your eyes off the bigger picture.
Thank you for that. Councillor Spears, thank you.
Thank you. I would like to thank Mrs Geisler for... firstly, I'd like to offer my condolences to Councillor Nicholl at this time. Please pass that on and sincerely send them. I'd like to thank Mrs Geisler for mentioning some of the events and the positivity that it brings. Sometimes quick fixes bring short-term gain. Short-term gain does not sustain long-term jobs, doesn't sustain long-term viability. We didn't take quick fixes when we went and pushed ahead with the Kelpies, the wheel, the helix, and a lot of different things. But every high street in the country is suffering, some a lot worse than us. I was in Chelmsford last month. Sad to see their municipal buildings now sold on because they've outsourced every service. I would hate to see that happen here, that things got so desperate that our council was outsourced to try and keep things going. But I've been asked to say, let's look at the positive side and let's look at what we can do. We can all get behind the traders and the high street groups who have sat on these benches at every occasion and tried to tell you, get behind the regeneration. But I would also say to the people who don't shop in Falkirk, and a lot of them complain about Falkirk, and you said we've lost 27% of jobs. That's 27% of these people don't, because of the economic climate, have money to spend in the high street. So yes, we can turn it into some utopian cafe society, or we can address the problem. Town centres are changing. Big multinationals, which we have no control over, are leaving town centres all over the UK. But we can try and help develop niche shops. Now, I think Falkirk, while we're suffering, we are not suffering as much as places like Motherwell and Bathgate, and you go to some other places and you think, oh my God, as Billy Connolly said, a desert with windies. Hence, we have been putting on events. We are working to improve these events, especially on our heritage. We have a very rich heritage here. Look at Stirling as a castle in the Battle of Bannockburn. And their tourism trade has lived off that for years and years. Now, we had the Battle of Falkirk, and I was very pleased to be at the commemoration for the Second Battle of Falkirk at the weekend. These events bring people in. If you weren't there, let me assure you, especially the John de Graham event for the First Battle of Falkirk, this brings in thousands of people and is growing year on year. If you look at where, not just in the UK, but other countries handle these great historical events in their area, they sell it. They get out and sell it. And people travel from all over Europe and some places all over the world to attend these events. Now, as we know, tourism is growing year on year in this area. I must say, and I will appeal, on a very low budget, we are trying to bring people in and make people stay here and people buy here. Hence, we need to say to local people, buy local. Shop in Bowness, shop in Stennismuir, please shop in Grangemouth, Denny, Larbert, please shop in Falkirk. If you're going to complain that shops are closing and you don't shop here, think twice about what you're saying. Events, as Mrs. Geisler stated, especially the food festival, where the Falkirk crafts people got together and decorated the town, nobody could not have been impressed on that day. You looked up that high street and you could have been in any town in Europe. Any city in Europe would have been proud to put an event like that. And I send out my sincere thanks to Falkirk Delivers, who on a very small budget managed to punch well above their weight and keep our town alive and kicking. What I would say to you is, get behind it, support it. Hey, even attend the events. It'd be great to see you there. But talk our town up, don't talk our town down. And if I was living abroad and I went on the internet and looked at local papers or local stuff and I heard the complete and utter doom and gloom, I would say, I don't want to go there. But we're trying to improve, especially on events, and be positive, and we are all the ambassadors for this area, and we are more than most the ambassadors, and we should be sending out a clear message. This is the place to visit. If you have heritage here, especially after Brexit, we don't know how the pound will go or whether this will be a very, very good and economical place to come. We don't know, you know, there's a epidemic could happen in China where we're going to lose people coming. But we need to talk the place up. If we're talking it down, then it'll never work because we have no self-belief. So I ask for your support, and I agree with Councillor Alexander. Let's get behind this. Let's improve our town centre. Let's improve the footfall.
Thank you for your input, sir. This report is only for noting, but we've had a really good debate. I'm going to ask Councillor Gold to come in. That will be the last. Thank you.
Well, thanks for that, Provost. And I'm not sure if Councillor Monroe moved an amendment, because I was if she did, I missed it. There's been so much talk since she made her contribution. And it is fair to say that everyone in here, I think, supports retailers right across the council area. In fact, I think I was a provost in 1988 when the High Street was pedestrianised, and that was a big thing at that time. The TIF's been spoken about. The TIF didn't go through without any questions for certain people in this chamber. TIF didn't just sail through. Yes, it's been a big success. It's been a success that we said it would be, and that's fair enough. People are now recognising that that's okay. But before I say anything else, I'd like to ask a question, because there's an here about no finishing work that's been started. We seem to gloss over the things that we try to do as a council. And bear in mind, it was this administration, the last administration, that brought in the THI, which didn't sail through either. People were asking questions about that. You're entitled to ask questions. And, of course, you're entitled to criticise. One of the biggest issues in the last administration was Denny Town Centre. That side vehemently opposed it. The SNP vehemently opposed the update of Denny Town Centre. In fact, John McInerney, who was our MP, couldn't take part in the debate and asked that another Denny councillor who didn't manage to get through at the last election speak on his behalf. We had cardboard models of how the Denny Town Centre should be. But that's all history. What I'd like to ask Mrs Geiser at this juncture, Provost, is what's happening with Denny Town Centres in the last 3 years? What are we doing with it?
Thank you, Provost. Obviously, phase 1 of Denny Town Centre has been completed. Phase 3 is the development site, which has been disposed of as approved by members, and we're left with the phase 2 site, which is obviously providing us with some challenges associated with the downturn in retail opportunities. But I don't know if you've got maybe more up-to-date information on that.
Yes, we've attempted to market on 2 occasions now the phase 2 site within Denny Town Centre, which has demonstrated that, given the conversations we've been having this morning about the performance of the retail sector, that there is limited interest in that site. However, we are progressing with alternative interest in that site in terms of potential residential inquiries.
Thanks for that. The reason I was asking that question, because the questions were statements being made about if people don't support a project, the damage that can be done. And I've got to tell you that, in my clear opinion, the damage was done to Denny Town Centre, first of all, when we applied and it was going through the planning process. I mean, they voted against even getting planning consent. The SNP voted against even getting... Mr Alexander, I'll finish first.
Excuse me.
Mr Alexander, I'll finish first.
Excuse me. No, excuse me. Could be... Sorry, Councillor Alexander, just could you take a seat for a minute? I know where you're coming from, Councillor Goldie, but we're discussing the Falkirk Town Centre. You could maybe concentrate
Denny
on
Town
that.
Centre was mentioned, probably.
Yeah, but we could concentrate on Falkirk Town Centre.
Yeah,
Thank you.
could also just...
Point of order, okay, hold on.
Just for clarity.
Right. Hold on a second. Right.
Councillor Goldie is well aware of the fact that the planning committee sits on a non-political basis. I asked him to withdraw his comments.
Okay, that's fine.
Can I just say something first of all? That was brought to the full council. Let me just say this, Provost, and I'm not trying to act clever. The rules of the game and the standing orders say that when I'm speaking, the person that calls the point of order has to wait until I come up to finish.
Okay.
Let's just
right.
get that right. Mr. Moody will check that in a minute.
Okay. Thank you.
What I'm saying is very clear, and Mr Alexander can try and deny it all he wants, but we'll get the paperwork. The SNP voted en bloc in this chamber against the Denny Town
I'm
Centre
sorry,
being
Provost.
consent.
Could I just say that Councillor Alexander's point is well made.
Yeah.
Whether
Yeah.
it was at full council or at planning
Right.
committee,
Okay.
the planning decisions are non-political,
Okay.
and that should not be struck from the record. And I would ask Councillor Goldie to
Okay,
apologise.
thank you. Councillor Goldie, if you just concentrate now on the
Right, okay,
Falkirk Town Centre.
Right, because
Thank you,
Mr
sir.
Goldie
Thank
indicate
you,
if
sir.
he's prepared to withdraw that comment.
Perfect.
Absolutely not.
Right, that's...
Can you let me finish,
say
please?
No. Fine, okay.
Mr Moody, that would be
Oh, here we go.
something for consideration for
Here's the
Councillor
backup
It's
coming
been
in.
noted, it's been noted. Thank you.
Provost, I don't know if it's a tribute act or
No,
what's
no.
happening, but
Have you
let me
concentrated
let
in
me
the
just
Falkirk
finish.
Town Centre, sir?
Well,
Thank you.
Well, it's fine. I'll concentrate in Falkirk Town Centre. On Falkirk Town Centre, the retailers, the one thing the retailers really need is certainty about what we are going to be doing. That is exactly what this town centre...
Certainly got that when you were convener.
Alexander, come on. Come on. Come on. It's okay. He's been told. Thank you, sir. Carry on.
Well, let me just say this about that last comment, because you've got to respond to the comment, Provost. When have I ever objected to anything in the town centre? I'm not asking you to reply to that. What I'm saying is this. This side of the house or anybody else is entitled to ask questions. And by the way, if you want me to go down that line, when we're paying people off, when we're cutting services, when the people that need the money and need the services and are desperate for services, school meals, old age pensioners, we will consider seriously how we spend that budget. Now, if I be allowed, I'll go back to what I was going to say about town centre retailers. The town centre retailers really need certainty in what's going to happen. No bits and pieces. And I'm delighted the debate's here today, because everything to do with this project on the Falkirk Town Centre should come before the council before it's approved. Let's get down to the nitty-gritty and let's get it in here and let's decide what we're going to be doing. That's all I'm saying about the town centre, because it's going to take 4 or 5 years, and in 4 and 5 years, goodness knows how many of the retailers will be left up there. And let's don't forget one other thing, as has been stressed. We're dealing with something that we never knew was going to happen. We never knew the internet boom was going to happen. And let me just finally say on this, on Denny, on Falkirk and Falkirk shopping, let me say this to you. The place down the road, the retail park, will only be immune to the effects of the internet. Make no mistake about that. But when you're talking about people losing jobs, whether it's in our council service or in the town centre shopping, anywhere, this side of the house will be concerned about jobs being lost anywhere, and we will fight to protect that. Even, Mr Alexander, when your administration's putting people out the door.
Okay, right. Okay, as I said before, it's the report was for noting. We gave everybody an opportunity, most people an opportunity, and spoke. I stated quite clearly that Councillor Goldie would be the last speaker, so we're noting the report. Report noted. Thank you. Let's move on. Thank you. That takes us now to item 5 on your agenda, Housing Revenue Account and Council House Rents, 2020-21, 2024-25. The pages 16 to 29 on your agenda papers, and the report is by Mr Stuart Ritchie, Director of Corporate and Housing Services. Thank you, Mr Ritchie.
Thank you, Provost, and good morning to members. Can I start the presentation of these two reports by giving my thanks to David, to Kenny and their teams, colleagues in Finance and Development Services, for the work which has gone on in the preparation of the two reports relating to housing on your agenda this morning. We start the report in section 3 by reminding elected members we have just over 16,000 tenants. There is a requirement for the HRA to be self-financing, and that's self-financing from council house rents and other income, and we have a statutory requirement to review the level of council house rents on an annual basis. We provide some contextual information in section 4 of the report in relation to our current rent levels, just over £68 per week, and in relation to where that stands in national terms, we have the 6th lowest rent of the 26 local authorities who have housing stock, with the 7th highest level of repairs and improvement expenditure per house and the 10th lowest supervision and management costs. Section 5 of the report turns to our requirements under the Scottish Housing Quality Standard, SHQS. We have a housing management plan in place which provides us a strategic and planned approach to how we go about improving and maintaining our housing stock, and that sets the framework for the basis of future capital and revenue investment in our housing stock. So our capital and revenue funding needs to align with the investment requirements coming from the asset management plan. Section 6 of the report just focuses on some of the pressures being faced on the HRA in the forthcoming year. I would draw your attention to the narrative that appears under capital charges. You've heard Brian talking for a number of months now around the issue of debt and the ability to pay off old historic debt, which is expensive. So we've taken the opportunity to do that as far as the HRA is concerned, and there are also debt charges associated with the level of capital investment that we have in our programme. And that takes me to section 7.2 of your report, where I remind members that about 70 pence in every pound that we collect in rents is directed to repaying either the borrowing costs associated with capital investment or paying for the day-to-day maintenance and improvements in our housing stock. Investment in our housing stock to meet the SHQS standards, together with our commitment to new build, has seen our capital programmes increase significantly over the course of the year. And we've made reference, just by way of context, in section 7.2 to that significant level of investment. And if we turn the clock back to financial year 2010, we were spending somewhere in the region of £19 million per annum in our housing stock. The programme before you in the next item of the agenda has a programme of just short of £320 million over the life of the programme, which provides an average of £63 million of investment per annum, almost 3 times what we were spending in 2010. Section 7.3 of the report then just looks a wee bit further out on that, so we've done a bit of modelling to look at what the HRA might look like over the course of the next 50 years. And of course, we've spent all this money over the course of the last 10 years bringing our housing stock up to the SHQS standard. But as you know yourself from your own properties, you need to continue to invest in your housing stock, otherwise it starts to deteriorate. So not surprisingly, as you look out over a period of time, that requirement for investment is not going away. Section 8 of the report picks up on the consultation that we carried out at the back end of last year. So we issued consultation questionnaires to all of our tenants. We got just short of 1,500 responses, a bit more than we got the previous year. And the responses to the indicative rent increases that we asked for consultation are set out in section 8.2 of the report. Section 9.4 of the report, I think, just sets out for members' awareness one of the implications of our new build projects. So new build projects are obviously great because it adds to the social, affordable housing stock that we have, but it brings with it a burden to the HRA. The borrowing cost associated with new build isn't met by the rents that are charged. So over the course of the life of the capital programme, which we'll consider next, we're looking to build an extra 600 affordable properties. By the end of that capital programme, that will bring an extra £1.2 million burden to the HRA, and obviously that increases pressure on rent increases as well. There's a table set out at section 9.6 which looks at the three options that we consulted our tenants on. The middle option, option 2, is 3%, and our calculations suggest that there's a 3% increase required in order to balance the HRA next year. If you move to the left of that and you go lower than 3%, you can see the consequences of that in terms of a reduction in rental income and what that means for capital investment. If you go to the right of the 3% and increase the rents above 3%, then you can see the increased rental income and increased capital investment opportunities. Started off, Provost, by giving some information on context of our rents, and I'll finish with some context as well. In section 9.7 of the report, we go back to what's happening in Scotland and advise the members that the rent increases for 2019-20 on average was just over 3% for the current financial year, and almost 60% of local authorities set a rent increase of 3% or above for the current financial year. And all of that is associated with SHQS and capital investment in new build housing. So we all find ourselves in the same place of the HRA having to be self-financing a requirement to upgrade and maintain our housing stock an acceptable standard. And the only way we can do that, as I say, is through our council house rents. So the recommendations, Provost, are set out in section 2 of the report. I'm happy to answer any questions that members have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Ritchie. Councillor Meiklejohn, is it going to be? Fine, thank you. Councillor Hughes, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Provost. I have a motion which will be circulated shortly, but yes, if you don't mind, of your approval, Provost. Thank you. First of all, Provost, can I just say that I have known Councillor Nicholl for many years, and I consider Malcolm a friend. And this morning, my thoughts are with you, Malcolm. In terms of the motion for agenda item 5, I've put down two motions. One is for agenda item 5 and agenda item 6 on one paper. So just please fold it over and we can concentrate on agenda item 5. What I've written is that council house rents, members are asked to agree a rent increase of 3% for financial year 2020-21, together with a 3% increase in the charges set out in Appendix 4 to the report for the same financial year. Approve the housing revenue account budget for financial year 2020-21 as set out in Appendix 2 of the report, and note the indicative budgets and rent levels for 2021-22 through to 2024-25 as representing the best available information at this time. I usually at this time of year try to delve a little bit into history. And what I wanted to do was put a little bit of context in terms of this report. In terms of item 8 of this report refers to consultation. When we look at 8.1, social landlords have an obligation to consult tenants regarding proposals to change rents and have regard to their views in setting new rent levels. Rights and responsibilities regarding tenancy agreements were governed by an Act of Parliament known as the Housing Scotland Act 1987. In July 2001, the Scottish Parliament passed a new act, the Housing Scotland Act 2001, which introduced improved rights and responsibilities within a new Scottish Secure Tenancy Agreement. The Act in relation to tenant participation set out that local authority landlords and registered social landlords must prepare a strategy, a tenant participation strategy for promoting the participation of tenants, for example, in relation to the management of housing accommodation and the provision of related services. Having arrangements for obtaining and taking account of the views of registered tenant organisations and tenants, also the nature and content of such proposals. Notify tenant organisations and tenants of proposals. Inform tenant organisations and tenants about the proposals and their likely effect. Give an assessment of the resources, including financial, required, and a statement of the resources proposed to give effect to the strategy. This report highlights the process that has been gone through mirroring the Housing Scotland Act 2001. Of course, other housing acts have come into effect since then. Engaging with our tenants to ascertain their views on a range of options relating to a rent increase is vitally important as the result of that consultation sets out the parameters and possible future direction of travel. As the housing revenue account must be self-financing from rents, a 3% increase will maintain housing investment levels to ensure that our stock meets housing standards and also delivers a programme of additional affordable homes to help meet demand. The expenditure on the draft housing revenue account for 2020-2021 is estimated to be £67.3 million. Later in 2020, tenants will be consulted on a rent increase covering the 3-year period 21-22 to 23-24. Based on 2019-20 performance indicators published by the Scottish Government, Falkirk Council had the 6th lowest rent, the 7th highest level of repairs and improvement spending per house compared to the other 25 local authority landlords in Scotland, and also the 10th lowest supervision and management costs. However, we must also recognise, and I think this is important, this must stress this as important as well. However, we must also recognise that as welfare reform and economic austerity continues, tenants will experience further financial pressures, increasing the likelihood of possible increase in the level of arrears. Access to additional advice and support has been put in place to assist affected tenants. This is an excellent recurrent report covering such matters as the Scottish Housing Quality Standard, Housing Revenue Account, financial planning, consultation, rent charges, options, what our tenants pay for, and the 2021 Housing Revenue Account. I ask that members pass the motion as set out in the paper presented. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Councillor Colley.
Yes, I want to thank officers for the report and the work that's been done in consulting with tenants on rent levels. And I know some of the issues around dissatisfaction with the fabric of their properties. We all know that rents help invest in improvements and in new housing and in support via the IJB, which is probably where I see most of it, around the garden aid and adaptations for disabled people. I second the proposal that the level of 3% is sensible and the Gordon's motion. These investments continue to offer our tenants one of the lowest rents in Scotland. And I think I probably just wanted to quickly pick up on the work around 3.3 and keeping a very close eye on the impact of universal credit on our tenants, and I'm pleased to see that that's going to be factored in and continue to be monitored.
Thank you. Councillor Blackwood.
Thanks, Provost. We certainly can agree the additional motion, or the motion here on the Councillor Hughes has submitted. On the 3% increase in rents, obviously we recognise the need for this increase to continue investment in our housing stock. I've only one question to Mr Ritchie, and it's on 3.3. Income and rent arrears in the short term has been experienced. Are we anticipating this will improve in the long term, and if so, how do we propose to improve it, because honestly, universal credit's having a problem, creating problems for us.
Thank you, Provost. As far as our rent arrears is concerned, our rent arrears are improving compared to what the national picture is. We have an early intervention strategy as far as rent arrears is concerned. We're doing some work now when tenants take on their tenancy to start off with, trying to identify teams around the tenant to try and ensure that they have as much support in whatever ways possible to ensure that their tenancy is sustained. I think the key thing for us is making contact with tenants, trying to get them, if they fall into arrears, into some kind of repayment plan over whatever period that is. So as long as we're in contact with them, as long as they've got a repayment plan, then we can go forward. I think it's when we've got tenants that kind of drop off the radar, that's when we start to experience some difficulties. Worthwhile also, of course, reflecting the fact that tenants who've got rent arrears are likely to have other debts as well. So it's how can we put them in touch with Money Advice, Citizens Advice Bureau, and what other agencies are out there to support them.
Clarify, we've got a motion moved and seconded. We haven't got an amendment. So, Councillor Reid, do you want to say something?
Yes, it's, I thought it was a fairly obvious point, Chairman, sorry, Provost. It's hard to separate the two items, the rent level from the investment programme, but what's clearly stated is in order to sustain the capital programme, the 600 new houses, there has to be a rent level of 3% for the foreseeable future, not necessarily for the full 60 years. So I often wonder why we discuss this on an annual basis when we must have a rent increase of at least 3% each year. I just wondered, it may not be taken up in the present debate, but I wonder if it's something to contemplate in the future. Because if we don't get the 3% rise annually, we don't get 600 houses.
Provost, can I ask a question? Can I ask Mr Ritchie, in terms of the department as it's faced at the moment following the restructuring, if there's a net gain in jobs or a net loss?
We have increased the number of jobs that we have in the housing division as a result of I was going to say recent, it's been around for a wee while, but there's an increase in the number of jobs that we have within the department, so we should have more troops out in the ground providing that support to the tenants that I spoke about. So we carried a number of vacancies for a number of years, and by and large these vacancies have all been filled.
Okay, thanks very much for that.
We'll agree that...
Question, Provost?
Pardon?
I'm just going to ask a question.
Question, yeah, ask.
Fine, okay. Is that okay? Yeah, okay. First of all, I'd like to congratulate Councillor Hughes on the report. Now, I used to represent the High Flats, so I don't do so much now, but I know that there are a great deal of appreciation about the work that's been done in the High Flats. But there's also real concerns among the community of the High Flats, one of which was the reason, the need to close their community rooms. So I understand now at Green Bank it's been closed as well. I just wonder either yourself, Councillor Hughes, or Mr Ritchie could tell us what was the reasons why the community rooms were closed in the High Flats, because the High Flats, each individual block is a community room. So I wonder if you could tell me, was it a financial reason why these were closed or otherwise? I have another question to ask.
I think this is probably a question for, through Mr Ritchie, but probably more for Mr Gillespie. Or
officers here, is there anybody minded? Mr Gillespie, would you like to come forward, sir? Maybe help the situation out. Thank you.
Provost, thank you. Mr Goldie's question. The issue specifically about Green Bank Court was very much that the committee there itself actually ceased to exist. And one of the things that we're also looking at when we look at these rooms, not just about the committee, about the community rooms, but any spaces, how we can better utilise that. So that's what we have been doing in high-rise flats, and we've been using some of the rooms that are no longer being used to turn them into adaptive properties, which is some of our greater needs. The community itself, quite rightly, as you said, is very important, and we're taking things on board as how we can utilise other communities to bring them together. And that, again, is one of the targets and aims of the service and the council, to try and bring in more communities and bring different functions within the rooms together that can touch various people. So that was the main reason for Greenbank Court for there. But other than that, we certainly support communities where we can.
Just before Mr McNeill goes, Mr Gillespie goes away, what about the rest of the rooms?
Provost, I would need to go into specifics in regards to what communities you're talking about. I've not got the information here. Happen to go through that. My understanding, standing here now, is I'm not aware of any. We did go and we tried to bring all the community rooms together to have one. It was one of the ongoing things where community groups themselves were running in different formats. We've pulled that together to make sure they're accountable. It safeguards themselves as well and how they were using their rooms. But other than that, I'm not aware of any other issue. Happy to come back to you, Councillor.
Provost, but could I just advise everybody and enlighten you to the fact that the Greenbank Court Tenants Committee are now being reformed. So hopefully there might be a stay of execution here. I don't know. Again, but Mr Reid will no doubt pick that up for me, because I'm not the local member. The other thing is the question yourself, Councillor Hughes, as the convener, you move the motion. But the other question was, there are concerns, again, particularly in Greenbank Court and Carmlin. Has there been any alterations in allocations or reductions in people working up there, or changes something? Because there was a meeting yesterday, in fact, 3 o'clock, called by the residents. And the feedback to me are real concerns about what's happening in Greenbank Court. I'll not ask Kenny or yourself to answer that. What I'm asking you is, would you take on board the tenants' concerns and go and organise a meeting? Mr Reid's already had one. Maybe you can get a collective one with yourself present, convener.
Okay, thank you. Okay, then, we're agreeing the report. It's okay. We're agreeing the report then. Thank you. Thanks for that. Then that takes us to item 6 on your agenda, which is the Housing Investment Programme 2020-21 to 2024-25. It's pages 30 to 39, and the report is again by Mr Ritchie, the Director of Corporate and Housing Services. Thank you, sir.
Yes, thanks, Provost. We've already spoken in the previous item about the Housing Investment Programme. So the proposals over the next 5 years is for a housing investment programme of just short of £320 million. That represents investment in our own housing stock associated with maintaining our property at the requirements of the SHQS, and also new build and buyback investment. Section 4 of the report picks up on the work associated with the investment in our own properties, and the estimated value is just short of £190 million. And we go through Section 4 of the report, just looking at the various aspects of capital investment that is proposed in our housing stock. Worthwhile drawing to members' attention a couple of things. First, in paragraph 4.4, where we will be starting a replacement programme next financial year of doors and windows across the council, and that's estimated at an annual cost of somewhere in the region of £12 million and upwards as we go forward, and that's about 1,500 properties benefiting from new doors and new windows on an annual basis. The other area I think that's worthwhile bringing to members' attention is set out in section 4.7 of the report, where we talk about those areas in gas deserts, and the local members received an update late yesterday afternoon in relation to what our action programme is in dealing with the issues of the tenants in properties in off-gas areas. So as far as the capital programme is concerned, we've made a provision of £4 million in the capital programme for replacement of these systems. The timing of the replacement is depending on the work that's being carried out at the moment, so members will be aware that there's a number of tests being carried out into the existing heating systems that we have, and we await the outcome of these technical assessments. That will be probably towards the end of March before we get all of that information collated, and we'll be able to take some action based on information at that point. These properties are coming to the end of their kind of natural life in the next few years anyway, so one way or another we're looking at replacement of these heating systems. So I wanted to draw that to members' attention. Section 5 of the report then looks at the investment in new build council housing and our buyback programme. So members should be aware through our strategic housing investment programme that we have proposals for the council to build just over 600 new homes, and that plan is set out in section 5.4 of the report. That brings with it Scottish Government funding. So just a reminder that in rough terms, the Scottish Government provide a third of the cost of a new build, the council 2/3, and it's the same for buybacks as well. So we're expecting just short of £32 million in Scottish Government funding support over the course of the next 5 years for our new build projects. As far as buybacks are concerned, we continue with our programme of looking to try and buy back about 80 additional properties per annum. That obviously helps with our affordable housing supply as well. Both of these things combined, Provost, then takes us to that programme just short of £320 million. And I think the last thing to say is just to remind members of the context of that scale of investment compared to where we were 10 years or so ago. The recommendations are set out in section 2 for members. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr Ritchie. Councillor Hughes. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Provost. The motion I'm presenting to members this morning is members are asked to agree the housing investment programme set out in the agenda in Appendix 1 to the report covering the financial years 2020-21 through to 2024-25. This report sets out an ambitious housing investment programme. Investment in housing has been building year on year from the previous administration to the current administration. What we have in this report is a continuity of approach which recognises the value of investing not just in bricks and mortar, but also investing in the people of Falkirk. This proposed investment allows us to not only improve the environment for our tenants, but also consider the well-being of our tenants. In paragraph 5.4, the report demonstrates our commitment as a council to provide new homes across the Falkirk Council area. New build council housing is expected to provide a further 602 new homes. Locations include Hall Glen, Grangemouth, Bonnybridge, Torwood, Denny, Banknock, Polmont, Langleys, Stennismuir and Bainsford. These developments will increase the total council's new build homes to over 1,000 new houses. Also, it is intended to continue with a programme of buying back ex-council properties. Around 80 additional homes per annum are currently being acquired, with around 550 additional homes acquired to date. Approximately £316 million of investment will be required over the next 5 years. In Appendix 1, a proposed expenditure profile is set out covering, for example, elemental improvement works, energy efficiency works, estate improvements, priority areas, health and safety, a total of £52.45 million. I am pleased that additional provision has been made, totalling £4 million, £2 million in 2021 and £2 million the following year, to provide more cost-effective heating systems for tenants within off-gas areas. In the previous report, Housing Revenue Account and Council House Rents, I outlined the importance of consultation. In producing the Housing Asset Plan, Local Housing Strategy and Strategic Housing Investment Plan, it is important to recognise the value of contributions from tenants, residents, the Scottish Government, partner organisations such as registered social landlords and other council services. The importance of climate change is stressed through a new energy efficiency standard for social housing, EESSH. This new standard is aimed at reducing carbon emissions and eradicating fuel poverty. The target date to achieve the first milestones within the energy efficiency standard for social housing is 31st of December 2020. As at March 2019, 98.8% of our stock is fully EESSH compliant. Without the hard work of our staff, their commitment to ensuring that excellent progress is made in developing these ambitious plans, Falkirk Council would not be recognised as an innovative and creative council. I ask members to agree and accept the motion as presented. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We got a seconder for that?
Yes.
Councillor Binney. Sorry a minute. Was you coming in there?
Coming in there happily, second.
Okay, sorry about that. Councillor Binney. Councillor Blackwood had his light on for a while, yeah. Thank you, sir.
Okay, I'll second the report.
You're going to second?
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Blackwood.
That's absolutely fine. I would just say I'm delighted to support this motion as well for the Housing Investment Programme 20 to 21 to 24, 25. This is extremely good news and very uplifting for all our communities. Actually gives them hope, and all the people in a community, it helps improves their well-being. You know, many people in houses haven't got enough bedrooms and things like that, so they're able to have a new house. That changes and transforms people's lives. So this is a great initiative, our housing investment programme. And just for example, how popular it is and how much people want new houses. You'll all be aware about Blinkbonny in my area. Well, this is just a wee statistic for you, which just proves the point that we need new housing in all our areas. There was 3,583 bids from 361 people. So that shows you the demand for new housing. And this is what we need to sustain in the future, is new housing for our communities to improve everybody's lives. Thank you.
Totally agree with you. Councillor Kerr, then Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Provost. Leading on from Mr Ritchie regarding the non-gas areas, which is my own area with Councillor Hughes and Councillor McCluckie. As most people are aware, they've had a campaign going, mostly against Scottish Power, but Falkirk Council have came into the factor as well regarding the heating system. So I'm over the moon that we have decided that we need to look at this. And speaking to Mr Gillespie, it's easy to just say we'll put this heating system in and put it in, but it needs to be right It needs to be the right heating system. And at the moment, we haven't got that at the moment. So it will only be done right away. And I'd just like to thank Mr Gillespie, Mr McGee and Moira Fitzpatrick, who have worked closely with the community to get them some information and get them reassurances that Falkirk Council are listening and that we are working alongside them. The new doors and windows from this campaign, I was fortunate to go along to White Cross, one of the events, and offered my services to the residents, and I've been inundated with inquiries regarding this. Mostly the heating, but a lot to do with doors, damp, roofs. And at this time I thank Mr McGee and his team for taking on board the residents' queries. As Mr Ritchie says, the areas where I represent are coming to the end of their tether for the last refit that they had. So the investment, I wholeheartedly agree with the investment that we're putting in. But the people in my area can't go another winter with the money that they're spending. Some of them are spending between £100 and £150 a week on electricity. Some of them can't feed their children to heat them, or if they feed the children, they can't heat the house. So it can't go on. We're talking about fuel poverty. These are the people in my area who are experiencing this. So I'm glad for the report, and I'm glad that we recognise these areas. Thank you very much, Provost.
Thank you for your input, sir. I'm sure that every member shares the concerns that you've got, and for your people, I wholeheartedly sympathise. Councillor Reid, I believe it's yourself next, sir.
Okay, thank you, Provost. It's just really to repeat the point I made on the last item, hopefully not ad nauseum, but how many years will we have to increase the rents by 3% to cover the capital programme? And if it's a number of years, why is it brought up annually? Why not agree at some point that we have an annual increase of 3% for the foreseeable future?
Yep, thanks. Provost, probably two reasons. The first one is that we have a statutory requirement to review our rents on an annual basis. And the second thing is that our projections are just that, the projections based on a model which will be refined as we go. So we will bring something back to members on an annual basis based on up-to-date information and up-to-date information going forward as well. So that's why we set our rents on an annual basis.
I understand that, but I don't understand it in another sense, because if you don't go for 3%, you've already started a capital programme based on that. And therefore one has to change the capital programme, presumably, if you only go for 2%.
Thanks. Councillor Reid's correct. You would need to change the capital programme. I suppose the thing about the capital programme is that it is a programme rather than contracts which have been committed legally. So it's a programme of work, but as members will understand, we're looking at the next financial year in terms of making commitments for contracts, for improvements.
Okay. Could I first of all congratulate the report. It's excellent. In regard to housing allocation, the houses at Blinkbonny Road, for example, have a number of adapted properties, but it's not meeting the needs out there for disabled people, which is a big target to try and hit, to be honest. But apparently they were advertised as adapted and not as adaptable, which opens up a different aspect to things. For example, dining rooms could conceivably be converted into wet rooms, that kind of stuff. And I wondered if that was something that the housing service we take into account in future, because as you know, there's a lot of people in that very high category that are looking for houses that are adapted. So is there a case for a category of adaptable being introduced into the system?
Morning, Provost. Yeah, I concur that it's a pretty good report. However, I would just like to note my disappointment that there hasn't been, or there isn't any new builds proposed for Bowness. There seems to be a high identified need for private housing in Bowness, but I'm disappointed that there isn't any identified need for social housing.
Programme, is it just a case of sites? Is it Mr Gillespie going to answer that? Would you like to come forward, sir?
Provost, yeah. The housing itself is done through our SHIP programme. In years gone by, Bowness has had a lot of new build in Bowness, up the top end there. But also, it's not just the council that builds social. We have our registered social landlords like Weslow, and there's things within the SHIP, within Bowness that's there. So it's not just about the council itself. So there is some affordable housing within Bowness. And we tie that back to our housing need and demand assessment. So that's where we prioritise our SHIP. So there has been investment in the past in Bowness, and it's very much with the finances we've got with our RSL partners, and also our need. And what I mean by need, there is need all there, but we have to prioritise that. We have a very rigorous matrix that we go through due to the funding we're given by the Scottish Government as well, and the business cases given by our other RSL partners.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Coombs and then Councillor Kerr.
Thanks, Provost. Obviously, we are all glad to see that there is something getting done, but can I just point out it's not just up the Braes, that the tenants at Letham also have the electric weight system and have been struggling with their bills. And I appreciate that the primary cause of the problem is, as Councillor Kerr has said, it's the energy companies rather than the council, but there was a meeting last night, and hopefully the tenants appreciate that the council is doing all that it can within its remit to try and alleviate the problems, not just with the technical aspects of it, but I'm delighted to see that there's also help as with regards to benefits and the financial side of it if people are struggling. So I think that needs to be highlighted. And just finally, just with regard to new builds, I don't think anybody would argue against building new council houses. I think what's obvious is that we need to build more of them. And as Councillor Binney alluded to, everyone that's allocated a new build absolutely loves them. The quality of the housing can't be argued against. As I said, that anybody that's allocated a new house loves them. I believe even our local MSP was delighted when he was allocated his. That's all. Thanks.
Fine, thank you for that. Now, listen, there's a motion being moved and seconded. There's no amendment, so there's no need for debate, but it's an opportunity everybody's had. Councillor Kerr, what one final, is it a question?
Just a observance. Provost, on behalf of the two ladies at the campaign, I'd just like to, on their behalf, thank Martin Day and Alison Harris for helping with their cause. And they're on the, anybody's got a free Thursday or Friday night, they're on the One Show this Thursday, Friday, so if you want to watch it. I hope they didn't slag Falkirk Council.
Councillor Bow, sorry about that. You're the last, we'll wind up. Thank you, sir.
The mic itself, it didn't quite come on properly. As much I welcome and appreciate the Sandus in particular, Moan Ward and Stennismuir, where there's a good bit of house building to come in a number of years. The details on the window, I know there's an operational side to this, and I don't really want to do that, but when's information coming out of when the works will be, the doors and windows repairs? I know a lot happens already through the work side because I deal with your guys all the time on it, but will there be a detail coming out? I know in the past there's been lists of streets and things like that when they're getting done, or if that's due to come out at some point. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. We're not quite at that stage yet, so We're at the early stages of the procurement process, so we hope to be going out to have an initial engagement with the market shortly, in a matter of weeks, and then hope to begin the procurement process in March. So we're going to be looking at some time into the summer before we're going to be in a position to be able to have the information that you've spoken about, Councillor, in terms of what the streets are, what the programmes are, and how that gets rolled out over future years.
Okay, then we're agreed the report and the recommendations contained within. Thank you very much. On personal basis, just like to say that I'm really excited about this programme, especially about the new build. And just one question, maybe to Mr Ritchie before he goes away. As the fact is that we're all excited with the proposal of 600 new houses, and as Councillor Coombs says, the standard is absolutely superb. How many people have we got in the waiting list really up to date? Could maybe somebody answer that at the moment?
Yeah, thanks. This is something that the scrutiny panel looked at in the housing allocations. So, from memory, we've got something like 8,000 people on the waiting list, but less than half of those are actually bidding for houses. So one of the things that we are looking at in the allocations consultation that we're doing is how do we deal with that, waiting list with kind of 8,000, but only a small proportion actually bidding.
It would be tremendous if we could maybe get to build 8,000 houses maybe in the next capital programme. That's perfect. Thank you very much, Mr Ritchie. Okay, members, just to take us back to where we were, it's item 7, Revenue Budget, Medium Term Financial Plan. The report is by Mr Brian Smale, the Chief Finance Officer, and it's pages 40 to 73. Thank you, Mr Smale.
Thank you, Provost. The primary purpose of this item on the agenda is to give members the opportunity to consider and indeed on the back of that give feedback to the Trust on their savings proposals ahead of full consideration along with the Council services at the budget meeting on the 26th of February. The covering report, which I'll speak to briefly, doesn't purport to capture all the rich content that sits in the Trust submission that is before you and behind the report. I think there's probably 3 or 4 important contextual strands to the report. The first is the funding agreement, which sets the framework for the engagement with the Trust. The Trust's own 5-year strategic business plan, the joint working group that's active in terms of taking matters forward in association with the Trust, and of course the Council's strategic property review. Having said that, if I can just take you straight to section 4, which is the core of the paper, which contains the savings proposals being submitted by the Trust. These have already been considered by the member budget working group, and what's before you reflects those deliberations. You'll see in the first paragraph, 411, that the Trust has categorised the savings proposals or options into 2 categories. One is deliverable savings, and these are more readily deliverable business efficiency type savings. And the second category is the potential savings, which are likely to be of more interest to members in terms of having a service or a potential service impact. There's mention at paragraph 415 that one part of the savings options would require the progression of voluntary severance. And of course, as is the case with the Council, there would be a cost attached to that, which the Trust doesn't have a ready source to cover. So they've flagged up the need for some dialogue or some arrangement with the council in terms of how that may be progressed. There's mention at section 4.3 of the position with Grangemouth Golf. Of course, you may remember last year the council agreed to provide a sum of 50,000 to plug the deficit, in the expectation that a business case would be prepared to allow the golf club to continue on a sustainable basis. Unfortunately, that still remains the case. The issue hasn't been resolved, and there's a request for the roll forward of that deficit funding of 50,000 for a further year to allow a business case to be prepared and a way forward to sustain the golf club to be agreed. And perhaps finally, at section 4.5, there's mention of the capital element in the trust business plan, and references drawn to the actual business plan itself, where there's proposals for potentially significant investment, particularly at the Grangemouth Sports Complex. So if I can just take you back to the recommendations at the front end of the report, there's two. One is asking for you to provide that feedback to the trust as you see fit, and the second one is the issue of the ongoing deficit funding for the golf club, whether you wish to continue that or not. The Trust Chief Executive is here today and will be well placed to, I'm sure, address particular questions that members may have.
Before I bring in Councillor Meiklejohn, could maybe ask Maureen, would you like to come over here? It'd be advantageous if there's any questions coming your way if you were over in this area. Thank you. Councillor Meiklejohn, thank you.
Thank you, Provost. I think we are in unprecedented times around our budget, and as a result this information is coming at a later stage to members than would normally come to members, and I appreciate the challenge that gives to everybody in going forward, particularly around the consideration time, and certainly from the point of view of feedback from today's meeting and going to the Trust, it will be very challenging in order to be able to meet the timescales going forward. Going back to where we were last year and our budget process, the Trust weren't able to meet the targets that were given to them at that time without bringing forward a programme of closures. Members made it clear at that time that the closures, particularly in some of the facilities, weren't really acceptable, particularly around the libraries. And we have been clearly given that message that that's not something that members want to see in front of us. But what has been disappointing is the fact that there's not proposals that are entirely acceptable that have been brought forward in order to meet this year's target. Last year, the Council absorbed the 800,000 that was around properties at that time, and that was to be worked throughout the year. Unfortunately, as a council, we've not made those strategic decisions, but it has gone into a strategic property review, and the Trust manage those properties on behalf of council. So I think being able to take forward our strategic property review at a pace to look at the potential for reducing the burden across the council area, and that would impact on the Trust as well, particularly the revenue impacts for the various buildings in which they manage on our behalf, but it would also help the council to direct where we would seek to put investment in order to modernise facilities that would be less costly around running. And there has been good progress on that, with all properties being discussed by members recently, which will move to a feedback session for, I'm aware that some people weren't there, and at some point in the very near future enable us to start to have discussions out in the community. And I'm sure that the Trust would be more than happy to assist in those discussions and going forward. And I think it's important that they are involved in that particular process. In turning to where we are today and the proposals that have been come forward, it is a bit disappointing to find that there's less than half of what was predicted by the target, and I appreciate that in doing that, the Trust have had to take on the feedback from members about what's just not acceptable, but I would urge them to go back and look again at what's possible, look at alternative areas. And one area that I think is within this business plan is around voluntary severance. And I know that, like every organisation, the Trust has people who are seeking to make decisions about their life. But I think if perhaps a conversation could be had with the Trust and Mr Smale around the costs of that, and to look at if there are efficiencies from within the service that could help fund some of that voluntary severance going forward, or indeed a discussion that could be had with Council. So I don't think we've got anything that's robust enough to be able to make a view on in the paper in front of us today. There are a number of proposals that are indicated as achievable, those that have potential, and I think at this stage that has to be considered within the wider budget round. So while these are on the table and are available for members' consideration, we can't ignore the fact that while the Trust hasn't met its target, the pressure will then fall on other parts of the Council service, as it has done on previous years. And as things are becoming tighter and tighter across the Council services, it's becoming far more difficult to achieve meeting our budget gap with the pressures on other aspects of the service going forward. So certainly my thoughts are to Maureen and her team and the board is to go back and have another look and see what other things they can bring forward. And I have to say that will be reflected certainly from my group to all services going forward, is to actually look at what else there is for budget savings going forward. There is, we've all seen the amendment that's coming forward, and maybe it makes it easier if I just address that in this for the sake of moving things forward. Promise. I don't see, there's nothing in the amendment that I've not said or wouldn't have said coming forward. The addition of having, suggesting that the proposals around the Trust come into Council of the Future, I think that could actually help align and perhaps create some synergies between services, maybe helping to break down some of the challenging barriers that the Trust have, and potential efficiency savings in going forward. So I have no particular issue with that and going forward, and it would be up obviously for the Trust and the Trust Board to give that consideration. In relation to Grangemouth Golf Club, we have funded the continuation of that for the last 2 years. We've been asked to consider a further year. The view was to work towards that asset being transferred into the community. I believe that is still an aspiration. I also believe that there is a new committee. However, there is no robust business plan, and there's no comfort at this stage given to Council that that will in fact come to fruition.
I am therefore seeking to defer that decision and take that as part of the budget round, in the hope that we will be able to get a bit more clarity with regard to the community group and or the committee that are seeking to work up a business plan to take that over, because I would not like to see something transferred on a whim that wasn't going to be sustainable, and as a result there's a complete loss of facility. Whereas at this stage we still have the opportunity to take a view on it. So I appreciate that may be challenging, but I think that there has been some progress. I know there's been a number of meetings with the committee, certainly just in the last couple of weeks, and there is some bones of a business plan there, but I would really like to see something a wee bit more robust, and ask that the Trust continue to engage with them and perhaps give feedback on the concerns from Council, that we cannot continue to keep funding in this way, and if they are really wanting to actually take on and run this facility for the future, then I would urge them to make the steps that they need to give us the comfort so that we can actually do that for the following year. On that, there's no real recommendation other than asking the Trust to take on board the comments that are made. I would encourage the involvement with the Council of the Future. There certainly is already engagement within the Strategic Property Review, and that needs to continue, but as a Council we need to do that at pace in order to be able to feed into our future budget deliberations going forward, and ask that we continue to have the dialogue with the Trust going forward.
To your views on the amendment, whether it be an incorporation, but Mr. Moody will explain this.
Yes, I think it's just exactly as the Provost has put it there. It was just to clarify if you were adopting the terms of the amendment into your motion.
Happy to do that.
Can I just, for clarification, the Labour Group has an addendum.
Hold on a second, sorry.
The Labour Group has an addendum, just to give you notification of that. To the motion.
Okay, thank you. Councillor
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Smales. Some proposals have been brought forward and are not acceptable. Brought forward for consideration from Falkirk Community Trust, which is an outside parallel body set up by the Council. Can I ask, there's been an amendment brought forward, maybe the members of the Falkirk Community Trust Board from the Council, if they can give some direction then. Obviously they've been speaking on behalf of the Community Council on the board regarding these proposals, and it would be interesting if they could illuminate the Council on what's going on and how, if they've fought against some of these unacceptable proposals or if they're backing them.
Stage, I think we'll find out what the further amendment is before we bring. Could you maybe just clarify what it would be?
It's
addendum.
Not addendum. It's well, I mean, do you want my spiel, or do I get to come in with my spiel later on? Right, okay. Well, the addendum is I agree with the motion, which is in the report. We also would like as the addendum to agree that we put to bed and stop the 3K museum during the week and the 8K for Zetland kiosk. Sorry, Provost, the addendum is that we take out of these potential savings and put to bed the concerns in communities which are quite extreme, because I'm going to have to start my conversation to actually tell you the addendum. But anyway, briefly, I want to later. Briefly, the addendum is that we take the 3K out for Kinneil Museum closure during the week because the toilets are needed there, as well as the museum, and also the 8K for the kiosk and the toilets in Zetland Park, because of which there's been so much public concern over the last few days. I don't think it's fair to take that forward for another month to the budget. I would rather, instead of inflaming people and getting people het up, I would rather calm things down, and be taking that out the budget proposals today. That will certainly calm things down.
for the Leader of the Council that she's prepared to accept your amendment into that motion. So carry on.
Thank you, Provost. I agree with much of what the Leader has said, and this is a difficult challenge for us all. And the reason we're talking about this is that for the last 2 years, the Trust has failed in its obligations to bring forward the necessary savings to the extent of something over 800,000 last year and a similar sum this year. And these savings will clearly have to be made elsewhere, and all areas of the council are equally stretched. Other areas of the council's savings are being delivered through Council of the Future strategies, and it would be nice to feel that the Trust were able to do the same and find new ways of delivering services rather than give up on particular services. So the reason I'm putting this forward is simply to ensure that as a council and as council members, we're following the public pound, and we're sending a message to the Trust to say that the council notes with disappointment the failure of the Community Trust to meet its requested savings targets. It further notes that this is following a trend of previous years, thus putting an increased burden on other services. Council therefore asks the Trust to look again at making savings to be brought forward at the budget meeting, and asks that in the longer term the Community Trust works with the Council within the context of the Strategic Property Review and the Council of the Future programme to find new ways of delivering services in a more effective way, and working towards, of course, as being one council.
The Leader of the Council is incorporating your proposed amendment in. So just give us a second now till we go back.
So I think, Provost, at this stage we have a proposal from Councillor Black on behalf of the Labour Group in respect of two particular proposals from the Community Trust, and those relate to the Keneal Museum winter closure and also to the Zetland Park kiosk. And as I understand it, the proposal is that those be, the Council express its view at this stage that it would not propose to proceed with those. Yes. And although it's badged as an addendum, effectively, unless it's incorporated, it's a proposed amendment. So I think, Provost, you were coming to Councillor Meikle-John to see what our reaction to that would be.
Certainly, I know that within our own group's deliberations, we were not intending to take any of those items. It's not been the practice to start to eliminate things at this stage in the budget until we have a fuller picture. But however, I'm happy on this occasion. It is a relatively small amount of money that's involved to have those withdrawn from the programme, and that feedback certainly can go to the Trust, therefore accepting the addendum.
I'm happy with that, Provost. But can I just say no, because I didn't get a chance to speak. Right. Yeah. Right. I'm happy with that, but really, at the end of the day, the Trust does find itself in a difficult position, and I don't agree that the Trust hasn't worked with the Council. I think it has, but at the end of the day, there's only one place responsible for the situation the Trust finds itself in, and that is the Scottish Government cutting fundings to councils. It's the reality that was its Leader Council to having to establish the Trust in the first place to save the money every year, around £1 million. That's the main reason the Trust was established. And it's the reality that we're asking the Trust to make nearly half their budget cuts, nearly £5 million in cuts to the Trust. And these are services that are valued greatly by our communities, and we're almost halving their budget. So as I say, there's only one place that really has the blame. So I'm really glad that the residents in Grangemouth will keep their toilets and keep their kiosks, because at the end of the day, they're going to get they've worked really hard. Residents, council officers, Friends of Zetland Park Group. They've worked really hard to get almost £1 million in heritage lottery funding. They've got that money. In a couple of years' time, the flood defences are going to pay for new toilets in the park. We need to keep those toilets open just now. And the same with the kiosk and the museum in Kinneil. I'm pleased about that because it's not just a museum, it's also a toilet facility in the park, the only one. Thank you, Provost.
Provost, we've already asked the board members to explain. There's been a request to ask the board members to explain. Both put forward an amendment and an addendum from their group, and they have board members sitting on the trust board. No point legal. I was saying, the board members represent the council. Can they explain why they've let some of this stuff come through?
Just to clarify where we are at the minute, we have the motion contained within the report. We had an amendment for the Conservatives, which was incorporated into the original motion with the leader, who agreed. Then we had an addendum for the Labour group, and after due consideration, that's been agreed as well. So where we are now, we're going to go to Councillor. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Just a wee bit further information. As Councillor Black stated, with the flood defence work coming in, over the next couple of years, the kiosk and toilet should be getting replaced. So we'll get a nice new kiosk, a nice new toilet. The only difference is it's a like for like, apart from the current legislation, it's got to be a disabled toilet, which we don't have now. So we're actually getting an improvement. And the crux of it is that only applies if that building and the toilet is still operational. If that is taken away, we get nothing. So it's very important that that is kept. Also, alluded to the work that's going to be happening in the park very soon. There's about £2 million getting spent. It's going to have one of only 3 inclusive play areas in the whole of Scotland. It's going to bring people in from the Falkirk area, the local area and the wider area. We need to have facilities for these people coming in. The Trust should be looking forward to using that facility to make money. That's what they're there for, and they don't seem to be doing that. So there's an opportunity there, so I would like them to take that on board.
Thanks for your input, sir. Councillor Blackwood.
Thank you, Provost. Provost, a question in 4.14 of the report, the Denny Sports Centre. The Trust's original proposal was to close this facility, and I believe we're now taking a step back from that proposal. The Trust has now identified £31,000 worth of savings by reducing the opening hours. I think the question I'm asking is, where these hours will be reduced?
I think, as noted in the report, the proposal would be to review the opening hours Monday to Friday during the day when the facility is quietest. Less than 14% of the use of the centre happens between Monday and Friday, and between 9 in the morning and 4:30 in the afternoon.
Okay, thank you for that. We're going to Councillor Reid, then Councillor Alexander, then Councillor King.
I think given the situation as you describe it, Provost, this the debate should last much longer, but as someone who served on the Trust at its creation and watched how with budget matters, I think some of the vocabulary used this morning is unfortunate. To describe it as a failure when you don't apply it to any other service is, I think, discriminating. As Black pointed out, it's been asked for a 50% cut in his budget, unlike any other service. I think Councillor Munro used the phrase, the Trust should be equally stretched along with other services. I can assure you, in my time in the Trust, it's stretched until the elastic almost broke. And I don't think that vocabulary is helpful. It's as if the Trust somehow was different from any other service. And I think we should avoid that form of discrimination. The other point, if I may ask, Provost, and I think it has been covered, that's the situation at Muiravenside, where a cut to a charity that enabled kids from Grange, basically. understand that it's been addressed by education. I don't know if Mr Naylor can enlighten us on that.
You answer that, Mr Naylor, just to clarify that question,
It was at Muirhavenside, Robert, whereby the kids employed there from Carn Grange, part of it was heavily financed by a group called Real Action, I think it was called. Real Jobs, yeah. I understand that provision will continue. Just
Sorry.
Decision was taken at last year's budget in terms of the council's grant allocation that funding would cease.
Yeah.
And what we've been doing since is working with the employment training unit, the school and the parents in terms of our developing the young workforce agenda to make sure that the pathways for those children are replicated and improved following the ceasing of funding of the Real Jobs project.
Yeah, okay. I think that simple point illustrates that another service going to pick up the tab that in the past has affected the trust, so it's working together as it's happened.
Provost, I'm a wee bit confused. When you start saying that there's a report with a number of items on it and you start prioritising, then the things that you say are just not acceptable. Then the question has to be asked, are you saying that the items that you've left behind are acceptable? The cuts that you've left behind are acceptable? And, you know, and that's something that we need a wee bit of clarification of. In relation to Councillor Reid's comments, I see the point, Pat, but there's no other department in this council that can say that it can apply for across the whole range of private sector, public sector and voluntary sector funding than the Trust. And that was one of the reasons that the Trust was set up. In the first place, it was set up to attract additional funding. It was set up to lessen the subsidy that was coming from Falkirk Council. These figures don't appear from nowhere. They appear from the original Trust model that was set up. It appears from the original reports. They're contained within countless pieces of correspondence regarding the budgetary considerations for the Trust. And, you know, it's something that we said at the time. I hate to say I told you so. It was said at the time that the ambition level for the cuts for that were earmarked at that point were too ambitious. That the targets set by the administration on behalf of the then to be Trust were too ambitious. Now, nothing wrong with ambition, providing it's realistic. And we said at the time it wasn't realistic. In saying that, we are where we are. And we've got to try and make it work to the best of our ability. The Scottish Government are not responsible for this. They didn't set up the Trust. Falkirk Council set up the Trust. We desperately need to find out just exactly what the capacity of the Trust actually is. And if it's a case of setting up target after target is going to be broken time and time again, then we need to look fundamentally at how the Trust is set up, how it's established. But that's an argument for another day. We have a budget before us, or we have a budget that's soon to be before us, that we don't know about. We know that there's going to be a budget, but we don't know what format it's going to take. The funding mechanisms are all being left in a way that means that we struggle to know exactly how much money we're going to spend. If we're flatlining, for example, that means that we may actually have, by implication and by reality, an actual small increase in funding. If it's reallocating last year's budget, then the issues with regards to that. We don't know. But that means that it's essential that the trust, like every other department, look at every single area where it's possible to save money. And that's the reality of it. We need to look at every single way to save money, because the services that we deliver are too important. We've done incredibly well in the last few years in meeting our obligations. Look at Liverpool City Council, 63% cut in their funding in the last few years. 63%. Makes our 7% look kind of redundant. We need cohesion, we need consistency, more than anything else, to actually deal with this issue and to deal with the issues that are arising. Every single department is having problems, and understandably so. We need answers, but we need to ask the right questions.
But Sir, Councillor Coombs, sorry for the wait. Then I believe Councillor Bissett is right on the same time as you, and then we'll wind the debate up. Thank you.
Thanks, Provost. Provost, I think I'm disappointed at the reaction in the chamber. We're all saying here that, you know, it's all the Trust's fault. It's a them and us, and they haven't met their target. I think it was just last week we were all at a budget working group, so it was a cross-party meeting, and Maureen brought forward the Trust proposals, and the Trust board did have the savings that they were asked for from the Council. But at that budget working group, all parties agreed that they would remove some of these proposals, so before it came to Council. So I find it very difficult to understand why we're in this situation now. Unlike when prior to 2017, when the administration said that they would get rid of the Trust board, we had last year a working group to discuss whether or not the Trust should be brought back underneath the Council's wings, what should be done about it. And again, it was a cross-party group, and the choice to disband wasn't taken. So I think that we can't keep saying ifs and buts and maybes. It was looked at very carefully and decided, for all the reasons that it was initiated in the first place, that the Trust actually does do a good job, and that the leeway that they have to run alongside but separate to the Council gives them the opportunity. Can I ask Maureen, and I don't know if you'll know the answer to this or not, the income generation that the Trust, and I remember seeing graphs in the annual report, which is obviously in the Members' Lounge, if anybody actually wants to look at the true reflection of what the Trust does, to look at that. What percentage the income growth was, and have you any idea what external funding has been brought in by the Trust?
The percentage growth on an annual basis, as you say, you need to look at the detail on the report. I know when we carried out the review last year, the income had grown by 46% between when the Trust was set up to when the review was carried out. So when the Trust was set up, it was taking in an income of about £3.5 million per year. Our income this year will be just short of £8 million.
So quite a considerable...
With the only additional facility that's come on stream in that 8-year period is the Helix. So there's an income stream coming from the Helix, obviously still with a public subsidy, but we haven't opened a major new facility in that time, so changing the income from £3.5 million to just under £8 million has been as a consequence of the hard work and effort of the staff who make up the Trust.
Okay.
And in terms of external funding, we typically bring in between £1 and £1.25 million of external funding per year.
Right, that's great. Thanks very much. So that £1.25 million of external funding plus the £1 million that at the moment is still a benefit to the Council for not paying rates. So we're talking about £2 million at least of a benefit to the Trust, to the people out there that use these facilities that we don't have to find, if we had left the trust within the council. And again, if we had left the trust within the council, as we all know, the facilities would have been closed because they're not statutory, they would have been part of the council, and the council cuts that Councillor Black has said quite clearly come from a political decision in Scottish Government to cut council funding. The golf course. Can I ask again, Maureen, and sorry, I wasn't intending to talk on this, so I haven't given you any notification. What are the implications to the council if the trust withdrew from that facility? So not the implications to the trust, but that 50,000 that is being suggested continues to roll on as a subsidy to the golf course. If the trust withdrew from that facility, what are the implications to the council budgets?
Well, it would be a matter for the council to consider what the implications of us withdrawing from any facility would be. Obviously, there are staff employed at the golf course who are trust staff, and then there would be the long-term maintenance of the course. Who would be looking after the course if it wasn't being maintained by the trust? So the council would receive an asset back to its portfolio, which wouldn't be operated by us, and that would be a matter for the council as to what it did with that asset going forward.
Okay, that's great. Thanks very much. I think sometimes it's unclear. It's like it's the trust, but it's not. Obviously, it is a council facility and would revert back to council with the cost implications therein. And just finally, Councillor Spears, who often makes an issue and is keen to say that we should all be working together, I find it quite incredulous that today he's reverted back to his old games playing in here, that, you know, it's all your fault and what have you got to say about it. Perhaps Councillor Coleman, as a member of the Trust, might like to answer your direct questions.
Okay. No, listen.
Point of order.
I'll give you a point.
I didn't say it was anybody's fault. I asked if they would explain. Obviously, if she has some kind of guilt complex about that, I would ask her not. Ask her not to make up things that I say.
Fine. No, listen.
Because it will be quite clearly on the record what was actually said.
Okay, thank you. Now, listen, we've had a good debate. One of the areas that we always seem to dwell into is that we start a wee touch of the personal attacks on people. But that's politics. But the fact is that inside a chamber, especially when you've got the press and the members of the public there, we're here to do the business. And people have got an opportunity to speak in relation to the item, and it's just sometimes that we all drift, and I've been partially doing it myself. Councillor Bissett, and then I believe that Councillor Nicholl has been trying to get his light on, and you'll be the final one before we go back to the leader. Thank you.
Thanks, Provost. I think most of the talk about the trust being covered, and I agree with Cecil's view that I would like to see, I hope the Trust Board could accept or discuss coming, joining up, dovetailing with the Council of the Future project. Perhaps that might release some additional savings. And it's a difficult time for everybody, you know, across all departments. And let's be clear, the cut for Westminster is 2% and the cut for the Scottish Government is 7.6%. So I think we know where. Sorry? So it's so the cut is 7.6%. I think we know that, but what we need to see is if we might get a better settlement in the forthcoming budget, and we hope for that. I'd just like to ask Maureen, what is the Trust doing to maximise external funding, and at the moment are we sweating every asset, as they say?
I think we do try to get the maximum amount of external funding that's within our gift to get. I think there's two strands to external funding. One is the capital strand, and obviously we need to be able to identify a fund to match into that in order to be able to maximise the income. So the example of Callendar Park, where we had a £50,000 investment from the Council's capital programme to enable us to improve the setting of Calendar Park, and that was matched by £200,000 from funding externally in order to create a new facility in Calendar Park. So the key piece in there is when you've got some seed funding from which to build in order to attract in additional external funding, and where we've had that opportunity, I would say we've been generally very successful. I think the piece that members are often most interested in is what external funding is coming in to replace revenue funding. And I think if you picked up any charitable journal across the UK, what you'll see is that that's the biggest challenge facing charities, is where their ongoing revenue funding is under continued strain, and trying to find replacement funding is the most difficult thing to do, and is not possible generally, because clearly funders are not willing to pick up the cost of a funding programme that had been previously funded by someone else, particularly a local authority. And that's certainly one of the major challenges that the Trust faces when we're talking to external funders about the Council's position in terms of funding going forward, and the gap that we have in that. So that's something that we certainly try to do. But we've got lots of really good examples of funders, projects that are getting funded from relatively diverse range of organisations, but we continue to work at it to attract funds.
Councillor Nicholl, I know that you can understand your circumstances.
I will be brief, Provost, and it's really just to, at the conclusion of this meeting, to give a bit of friendly advice to the Trust. We have heard some comments from behind me here, and I would just like to give the assurance that I very much suspect, I'm not a betting man, but I very much suspect that the majority of opinion in this chamber in regards to the Trust lies more with the comments being made earlier by Councillor Alexander. We don't agree on very much, but I couldn't fault his contribution in regard to the Trust, rather than one or two of the siren voices coming behind. And if that ever needed to be tested, I would be very happy to put forward a motion, Provost.
Thank you very much. Now, Councillor Meikle-John, we didn't have a seconder for the original motion, which incorporates, as we all know, the amendment and the addendum. So can you have a seconder for your motion before you wind up? That's fine. That's fine. Perfect. So we just want to wind up.
Thank you. I'll be very brief, because we have had a wide-ranging debate, and you know, we do have to remember that we don't have our budget allocation. The UK budget is not until the 11th of March. And in the interim we will have a Scottish budget which may be tempered because we don't have all the final figures, and we need to take that into account now during our deliberations. I will also say that from my group's point of view, we have taken no formal decisions on any of the proposals here, other than agreeing to what's there. I think it's difficult to start to cherry pick, because then there's assumptions made about other decisions that you may or may not take. And the one I would say is around any sports centre, because I think there's more discussion and information needs to come forward before any full view can be taken of that. And I just want to make that clear at this time, that there's no final decision on that. I think there needs to be an ongoing dialogue with the Trust around their proposals and what may well come forward in the future before we get to the 26th of February. I think we have to make our working relationship as constructive as we possibly can with the Trust, because they are an arm's length organisation. They manage and deliver services on behalf of the Council. Therefore, a reputational relationship is really, really important with the Trust, because going forward, they are not going to just disappear overnight, despite what people's views may well be. My colleague, Councillor Alexander, has articulated where we got to. But it's up to us in the Council, having taken the decision a year ago, to make the Trust work. We made that commitment, and in the absence of any other proposals, then that is what we have to do. It's a difficult time, a challenging time, particularly this year, where we do have the largest budget gap. It's the biggest spike in the budget trajectory that is anticipated, which makes it very, very challenging. But I think there has to be an element of collaboration to reach a consensus going forward, because us bickering in here
over particularly at times small amounts of money isn't what the community out there want, and that's where I think that my administration are willing to be constructive, but being mindful we still have a budget gap to fulfil.